Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Laurel Grodman. I'm Managing Director of Admissions here at the Yale School of Management, and I am so happy to welcome you to our masterclass today with Professor Kyle Jensen on evidence-based entrepreneurship. We'll get right into it in a moment, but I would love to share a little bit about Kyle Jensen with you. He is our Associate Dean and Shanna and Eric Bass Director of Entrepreneurship and a Senior Lecturer here at the Yale School of Management. He is also an entrepreneur, developer, and a scientist. So before joining Yale SOM, he founded AgriVita, which is a venture-backed biotech company, Prior Smart, which is a patent analytics provider, and Row AI, a software development company focused on data science. So Kyle had an extensive experience as an entrepreneur even before joining us here at Yale SOM. He also worked previously at the nonprofit PIPRA, helping universities and developing economies establish technology licensing offices and helping scientists commercialize their research. In addition to teaching here at Yale SOM, Kyle works with many Yale startups outside the classroom as well. And his research interests include entrepreneurship, intellectual property, and innovation. And so I am so excited to have a conversation with Kyle today and get some of your questions answered about evidence-based entrepreneurship. I'll guide everyone towards the Q&A function. Please do not use the chat. We won't be checking that, but we will be sourcing questions from the ones that you submitted prior to today's event, as well as from the Q&A. So we'll keep an eye on that. So to kick things off, I'm going to start by asking you, Kyle, what is evidence-based entrepreneurship? And maybe if you could also talk about some of the ways in that it manifests in the curriculum here at SOM.
Yeah, Laurel, absolutely. Thanks for having me today. I'm really excited to join you, really excited to join so many people who are interested in the fantastic Yale School of Management. I hope you will apply here. I hope you will come. And I'm super jazzed to have a conversation with you today about evidence-based entrepreneurship. So what does that term mean? You probably also hear that term referred to as the lean startup. And the origin is essentially as follows, is that for many years, in fact, during the years in which I was a budding entrepreneur, we thought of entrepreneurship as something as follows. Like I was in the shower and shampooing and a great idea would strike me and I would write a business plan, raise a bunch of money and go out and do this thing. And that would lead to either fame and fortune or the demise of my startup company. And now we know that that's not that linear process, that kind of boom or bust, all or nothing process is really not the best way to approach entrepreneurship. That instead, these days, the best entrepreneurs approach entrepreneurship in their new ventures, something like scientists, okay? So we're really articulating hypotheses about a business and designing experiments that are going to interrogate those hypotheses, answer those hypotheses. So, for example, almost every venture, every idea for a company is about improving the lives of human beings somewhere. So somewhere in the world, we have this idea that there's people whose lives are not all they could be. So, for example, I would like a full head of hair or whatever. I would like, a warm jacket to keep me warm in the winter. I would like a sustainable car, or I would like whatever. So everything we need, everything we consume, everything we buy serves some purpose for us. This fantastic thermos here keeps my coffee warm. That's the problem that it solves for me. So as an entrepreneur, you have this hypothesis that there's living, breathing humans who are somewhere, and their lives are not all they could be, and you're going to design a product or service that is going to solve the problem that these people have. Okay, so that sounds great. But is that true? Do those people exist? Do they have the problem that you think they have? Are they numerous? Can you reach them? Do they have an ability to pay for this product or service? Is that the right product or service? Does it actually solve the problem that they have? These are all the kinds of questions as an entrepreneur you may ask of yourself. And so, but why would you ask those? One, life is precious. Like, I'm only going to live for a certain number of years, and I want to devote my time to noble, worthy things that are engaging and likely to bear fruit. So I don't want to waste my time on a venture that's kind of a non-starter, right? Another is that we're gonna involve people in this venture who are putting their lives on the line. That we're gonna have employees, we're gonna have venture capitalists, we're gonna have other kinds of people who are joining our effort. And so we want to kind of squeeze all the risk out by challenging the hypotheses that we have about our business. Finally, there's a lot of money on the line, right? So why would I take a risk with $20 million, when instead I could take a risk with, I don't know, $2,000, $20,000, and design some experiments that say, look, are the things I believe actually true? Do these people exist? So, returning to my, I don't know, question. Maybe I have some, I have an idea for a to-pay service, an on-demand monthly to-pay service for follically challenged individuals like myself. Are there people out there who are in the market for such a thing? Would they buy it? I could design small experiments. I could talk to people who have such a fantastic reflective pate as I do, and ask them, would you use this service? How much would you pay for this service? What kinds of to-pays would you like? I could take out ads online to see if they click on these things. So these are all in the sphere of evidence-based entrepreneurship, or the lean startup, which is essentially, let me approach my venture as a scientist, articulate my hypotheses, design experiments that are inexpensive to test those hypotheses, and to little by little diminish the risk that I'm taking so that I feel more confident investing more of my life, more money, and moving forward. We know now as social scientists that is a better way to approach entrepreneurship, rather than kind of having an idea and just sticking with that idea, waiting for the kind of the idea to come out of the blue. Okay, so Laurel, you asked, that was a long-winded answer to your question, what is evidence-based entrepreneurship? And here's the second part of your question was, how does that manifest in Yale's curriculum? So at the Yale School of Management, we have an incredible number of classes that are related to entrepreneurship. I mean, everything from obviously things that are entrepreneurship, like introduction to entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial finance, to entrepreneurship in different kinds of marketplaces, like the biotech marketplaces, the tech entrepreneurship. I teach tech entrepreneurship through classes that let you work on your ventures for credit. We have a fantastic startup founder practicum here, where students who are engaged in a full-time or engaged in a degree program at the School of Management can work on their ventures for credit. And then we have all sorts of other classes that are just, where entrepreneurship is a component. Okay, so in all of those classes, faculty use this kind of evidence-based entrepreneurship approach. That is, we compel the student entrepreneurs to articulate hypotheses about their ventures, to design experiments that test those hypotheses, and to make decisions based on data. And that fits in really well with everything else we teach about management. When we teach about accounting, when we teach about finance, when we teach about strategy, always we're talking about making decisions based on data, not intuition, not your gut. And so we shouldn't accept in the area of entrepreneurship that gut or intuition or a way of using a way of making decisions. So the answer to the second part of your question, how is lean startup, how is evidence-based entrepreneurship a part of the curriculum? It's ubiquitous in the curriculum, and we have here a fantastic curriculum. And I hope when you come to Yale SOM that you'll end up in my classes or my colleagues' classes in entrepreneurship. So that's a long-winded answer to your first question, Laurel.
No, it's a helpful introduction to this. And I think you've already sort of started to answer this, but I do think there's a perception that unlike marketing or finance or accounting, where I think there's clear evidence that a classroom-based learning approach is very helpful in kind of wrapping your head around that subject matter. I do think there's a bit of a perception out there that entrepreneurship can't be taught. It has to be done. You have to go out there and just kind of learn by doing. And so I'm curious to hear your take, obviously, on, as someone who is involved in the teaching of entrepreneurship, is this stuff that can be learned in the classroom?
Yeah, actually, that is one of my favorite questions. It's an ancient question, actually. There's in Plato's Meno, Socrates is asked by the character Meno, Socrates, can virtue be taught? Is it in one's nature, or is it learned through experience? So this is essentially, I mean, in the case of, in Plato's Meno, here virtue means excellence. And so oftentimes we ask the same thing of entrepreneurship. Many people think this is in your nature, right? You are just a bold, extroverted, risk-taking individual, and you can't teach such things. And certainly when we look at exemplars that are exalted in our popular media, like Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, whatever, we look at those people and we see iconoclasts, people whose success is rooted in how they behave, who they are. We don't look at these entrepreneurs and think, oh, that person's a successful entrepreneur because they went to XYZ business school. Okay. So, there's some reason to think that this nature part of entrepreneurship is true. Actually, there's some really cool research using twins that were separated at birth, and you can track using twins that are separated at birth who becomes an entrepreneur and who doesn't become an entrepreneur. And it turns out that there's a substantial genetic component to people who, I mean, it is actually true that there is a genetic component to people becoming entrepreneurs. Now, that shouldn't discourage you, because it turns out that the nurture component is actually a lot larger. So these twins that are separated at birth, the adoptive parents to whom they go, having those adoptive parents be entrepreneurs encourages the children to be entrepreneurs, and that effect is much larger than the genetic effect. Okay. So there's some reason to think that there's some truth to nurture. There's a famous quote by the former coach of the Boston Celtics said of basketball players, "You can't teach height." Yeah, okay, that's true. And is it true that there are certain people who seem like they're going to be great entrepreneurs? Yeah, totally. Does that mean that you can't learn to be an entrepreneur if you're not of that mold? No, not at all. It doesn't mean that at all. There is a substantial teachable component of entrepreneurship that is shown through these twin studies. It's borne out through research. Obviously, we can teach people what you would call propositional knowledge about entrepreneurship. So I can teach you facts about entrepreneurship. And I think there's any debate about that. When people say, is entrepreneurship teachable? And they're talking about this debate between, do you need to practice it or can you learn it in a classroom? I think what they really mean is that if I learn in the classroom, am I more predisposed to being a successful entrepreneur or not? Well, there actually the data are a little bit mixed. There's no good experiments that show that people who take a class in entrepreneurship at a university are going to be better entrepreneurs. However, we have a ton of data that says going to university and getting a generalized degree makes you a better entrepreneur. Okay, so education does have a very big effect. In fact, the returns to education, that is, you're going to pay for a degree, you're going to have some return on that degree. That's why people do it, because you make more money, generally speaking. The returns to education for entrepreneurs are actually higher than other students. So by a substantial margin, actually. And there's a number of reasons why we think this is true. The most important is that entrepreneurs get to choose what work they do. So, as an entrepreneur, I pick my project, I pick my venture. And so I have this kind of ability to focus my efforts on the areas where my education benefits me most. And that's a little bit different than people who go to work in a job that is where they're not necessarily choosing what they do. Okay, so long-winded answer to this question that is posed by Meno to the character Socrates in Plato's Meno. Is entrepreneurship learned? Is it innate, or is it something you learn through practice? The answer is actually all three. It's all three of those things. So you should take entrepreneurship classes. They are good, and you shouldn't take them even if you just to be an entrepreneur. You could take a class in entrepreneurship for the same reason I would take a class in music, not to be a musician, which might be financially unwise, but to be musical, which is a fantastic thing. So you should take classes in entrepreneurship to be entrepreneurial, if not an entrepreneur. But even if you do take it to be an entrepreneur, it will make you a better entrepreneur.
It's fascinating to hear about the educational returns piece of it, because I feel like there is sort of this cabal of the college dropout successful entrepreneur, which maybe there are examples of, but is, from what I'm hearing, is not necessarily the norm or the tried and true path.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Laurel. I think those are the outliers who capture our imagination, who become the covers of Time magazine or featured in social media and whatnot. But the average entrepreneur is older, is educated, has work experience, And on average, those are the better entrepreneurs too.
Mhm. That might be a nice segue. There's so many great questions and directions to go in, but there is certainly, I think, a widespread kind of belief that pursuing entrepreneurship is a risk, especially considering the fact, as many of our participants today probably are, business school is not an inexpensive proposition. And so how do you view that? And maybe with that, how have you seen students who you've worked with here at SOM sort of navigate that exchange, or that, or I guess, balance of, do I pursue a tried and true path where I know I'll have a stable income and maybe delay my entrepreneurial goals versus getting started on something now?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a monster of a question, actually, because there's many different answers, or many different things I want to say to you about that. One, it is absolutely true that entrepreneurship is risky. So if you look at the distribution of incomes for people who graduate from the Yale School of Management or any prestigious business school, they have a normal distribution, right? So you know, very few people graduate with low incomes, and no one's graduating with, very few are graduating with $1 million income. Although I have, seen such things occasionally, mostly. But for entrepreneurs, the distribution is a little bit different. The return to entrepreneurship is skew distributed, which is to say that there's a bunch of people who are basically have ventures that go under, and there's a small tail of people that goes very far out to the right, where people are making billions of dollars and stuff. Okay. So what we know, if you compare these two distributions, is that essentially the risk-adjusted returns to entrepreneurship are not super awesome. The median entrepreneur is going to make less than the median salaried graduate, all things equal. Now, I could discuss how that relates to what I told you earlier about the returns to education being better for entrepreneurs, if that comes up in the questions. So it is absolutely a risky thing. And why would you make such a decision? Well, one, you might just have a preference for that, right? So you want to do bold, brave things, and you're willing to accept this skewed distribution of returns in your life. A second reason to do that is that, look, most people who come to these incredibly prestigious, wonderful institutions, these top tier business schools, you have the basic necessities in life. You'll never be cold. You'll never be hungry. You'll never wonder where your next meal is coming from. You never be bereft of the basic needs of life. You have a great privilege to do bold and brave things, to pursue a new venture, to try to put a dent into the world. And this, I think, is the most compelling reason to pursue entrepreneurship, knowing that even if you fell as far as you could fall, you'd still be totally fine. So why not strive for something that makes a difference in the world? And that when you speak to student entrepreneurs who are making this, their friends are going to McKinsey, their friends are going to Goldman Sachs, or these other kinds of jobs that will suck the soul from you. I'm actually just not. That's probably not a fair thing to say. The students who are pursuing entrepreneurship, they are racked with doubt, and they find it difficult to watch their peers going into those vocations, knowing that they're going to get great salaries, but they are pleased by doing something that's a great adventure, pleased by doing something that could change the world and make it a better place, challenged every day in a way that their peers are not. And so I think what you would call these non-pecuniary benefits of entrepreneurship are large and real. Charting your own path, things like this. So even though it's risky, there's many things you get out of it. And of course, my anecdotal experience, my N of one experience, is that those are formative years, formative experiences, starting a venture. And I wouldn't go back and take a salaried job, for all the tea in China. So.
Thanks, Kyle. Let's move towards back to the specific topic here, evidence-based entrepreneurship. We have a number of questions around methodology and what it is and isn't. And so One that came in live today was, seems to be a lot of overlap between human-centered design and the lean startup methodology. Can you talk about the differences between the two, or are they really different words for similar ideas?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say that they're very similar ideas, very similar concepts. I think, you know, it's a Venn diagram, which there's a non-zero overlap, very substantial overlap, but not 100% overlap. So you can think of human-centered design as a kind of a problem-solving methodology, and that is probably a component of evidence-based entrepreneurship, right? So particularly the product side. So I'm interested in developing a product that is for humans. Obviously, humans are always our customers in the end of the day. And I need to craft that thing to solve the problems that these humans have. Human-centered design, I think, is an important strategy one might use for that. And many of the things that we discussed in evidence-based entrepreneurship or lean startup are drawn straight from human-centered design. There's things in human-centered design that are not part of the lean startup, and there's things in the lean startup and the evidence-based entrepreneurship that are not part of human-centered design. So non-zero overlap. Laurel, I feel like you're cutting out on me here. Okay, so Laurel's cut out. I'm going to answer some of the questions that are going on in the Q&A here. Samita is asking here, how can entrepreneurs gauge the duration and intensity of their pilot project? Well, one thing, so I don't know exactly what you mean, but I think one thing you might say is how much effort should I devote to my venture and to my series of experiments? And the answer is difficult to articulate with precision. One thing you might say, and this is common for MBA students, is look, here is the point in my degree program where I need to make a decision about what I'm going to do. And that's, let's say, March, whatever. And if I make a decision by March, I can go get this other job or work on my venture full time. And so I'm going to back out from March. By March, I should have these kinds of data that are going to inform my decision. And so if I need those kinds of data, I need to do these kinds of experiments, and this experiment needs to be done by before that other experiment. And so you can back out kind of how hard you need to be working and what amount of time I'm going to devote to this. And certainly there's only 24 hours in a day. People usually have classes. And the answer is that they can't be working on their venture full time. And that's not a terrible thing. Life is relatively, it's decently long. And if you don't work on your venture now, you can work on your venture later. And actually, the data suggests that if you work on your venture later, you'll be an even better entrepreneur. So, when you're in your mid 30s and 40s, this is kind of a core period when you have more industry expertise. You've completed your MBA. You have some knowledge of a particular opportunity and a social network and access to capital and things like that. Okay. Laurel, I see you joined me again.
Yeah, the challenges of having a remote school happening simultaneously with a webinar. So,
yes, I'm familiar with that challenge.
Apologize for that. Another question around evidence-based entrepreneurship. So how do you make evidence-based decisions in industries with very little data available?
Yes, yes, it is. That is tough. That is, so I don't have a super answer. There's a great quote that brings to mind from Jim Barksdale, who was the CEO of Netflix for some time, who said, if we have data, let's go with data. If all we have are opinions, let's go with mine. I love that quote. It's hilarious. But what the question really gets to is that sometimes you're thinking as an entrepreneur so far in the future that you can't think of an experiment that is going to tell you the answer that you need, and only doing the thing, trying to build the product is going to answer the question that you have. And so are there industries like that? Sure. Now, but I would argue that they're few and far between. So usually if you think, oh, look, I can't figure this out, there's no data here, I call BS on that. I think oftentimes there are data, and you just need to think harder about how to find them and what kinds of experiments you're going to make. So I think it's really rare that you can't design an experiment or find data that are going to inform your decision.
Mhm. Right, related to that, what if an entrepreneur has limited resources, so you don't have the backing or the means to conduct sort of extensive experimentation? What have you seen entrepreneurs do in those sorts of situations?
Yeah. So actually, I think the lean startup and evidence-based entrepreneurship is the cheaper route usually, right? So it's the route where we're going to spend just a little bit of money to answer the questions that we have, and not just let's say to people, oh, say to a venture capitalist, here's my idea, you should give me $3 million to go out and pursue this thing. But instead, we're gonna start really small. Oftentimes, the basic. Let's say you're totally bereft of resources. You have very, very, very little. What you might say then is, okay, I'm going to speak to some investors. I'm going to find some sources of capital, and here's the data, and figure out what data I need in order to garner the interest of those sources of capital. So if I find some angel investor willing to give me $10,000, what did that person need to see in order to part with that $10,000? And hopefully there's some experiment that costs $100 in order to get you there. And that's oftentimes the case. So we think about, for example, I have a new juggling ball business, and maybe it's for purple juggling balls, and I can take out some ad easily on Facebook, on Google or whatnot, to test what is the demand for purple juggling balls. Or I can do some kind of experiment about, just asking in social media sites like Reddit, are you interested in purple juggling balls? I can send out surveys to people and so on and so forth. And these are really inexpensive ways to collect data. Yeah.
I think we have a lot of budding entrepreneurs on the call today, and so can you share what the most common some of the most common mistakes you see entrepreneurs making, especially in their earlier ventures?
Yeah, I think it's hard to choose. There's so many mistakes.
Imagine.
I will tell you some. Before I say real mistakes, maybe I'll just tell you some of the funnier kind of tells of early stage entrepreneurs. So hilarious things that entrepreneurs say that are just not true. One is that they have no competitor, right? Or that no one's doing this, which is just always not true. Always. There's never a case in which there's no competitive product. Even if you're doing cold fusion or something like that, the alternative is like other forms of energy or whatever. So no matter what you're doing, there's always some alternative, and then alternative can be just the status quo, whatever the world is now, right? Which can be a better. Another tell of early stage or inexperienced entrepreneurs is people who are too secretive. So they worry, oh, if I tell people about my idea, someone's going to steal it. Well, the truth is that people generally don't steal ideas. And that's for two reasons. One, creating new businesses is hard. It really is super, super hard. And so you have to be a masochist to work, to some extent, to work on a startup. And very few people are out there just waiting to steal your idea and then work on it themselves. So you'll see people afraid to talk about their idea, or they'll ask for something like an NDA or something to talk about their idea. A second reason that people don't steal your idea, if you're a large companies actually stink at implementing new ideas. And so people often say, well, why can't XYZ do this, where XYZ is some kind of large company? And the answer is that XYZ has a business already, and they're producing products, and they're optimized around those products. And these giant corporations are what they are good at is doing what they did well yesterday and optimizing what they were doing yesterday, not what they're going to do tomorrow. Okay, so they are actually not great at stealing your ideas and building new businesses out of them. So one mistake that entrepreneurs make, and one tell of an experienced entrepreneur, is that they're bashful about their idea. What they should be instead is boastful. They should be an omnipresent advocate for what they're doing. They should be super enthused about telling the world, oh, this is my great thing. This is how it's going to change Earth and humankind. And you should come join me. You should give me money. You should be my customer. You have to be an advocate for what you're doing all the time. That's two answers. There's a bunch of other stuff too. Maybe we could talk for a couple hours about mistakes that entrepreneurs make, I think, Laurel.
usually do this. I'm going to ask my own question, though, coming off of what you said. I think it's very interesting. I like to dig a little bit more on why you think big companies are bad at being innovators or executing entrepreneurial ideas. After my own time at SOM, I worked at Unilever, and my favorite role within there was product development. But what you said very much resonates. I think big companies do have big challenges being kind of nimble and entrepreneurial in the way that I think many of our aspiring entrepreneurs might like to be. So I'd love to just ask a follow-up, why, what do you think some of the reasons for that are?
Well, I think the biggest thing is what I mentioned a few minutes ago, and that is much of the activities in a large corporation are designed to optimize rather than to innovate, right? So and this is most famously articulated in the Innovator's Dilemma work by Clay Christensen, right? That if I'm company XYZ, I discovered something a long time ago, something, and I built a business around it. And oftentimes the businesses into which I might go are things that cannibalize my existing business. So I spend a great deal of my time optimizing what I did yesterday and making the most of the innovation that I had yesterday. And I'm not very good generally about creating internally innovations that could potentially be harmful to that business. And I mean, this is a super, super common thing, I think, and it's much easier to optimize. And this is why, I mean, think about a company like Best Buy. Did Best Buy, well, Best Buy is a bad example, maybe. Blockbuster. Think about Blockbuster. When I was a kid, I used to go to the video store all the time. We would browse these VHS cassettes, right? You would walk for a long time, maybe an hour before you chose them, and you would argue with your family and stuff like this. Did Blockbuster see Netflix and this kind of stuff coming? Yeah, a mile away. But look, they couldn't really do anything about it. They had they weren't able to pivot the organization fast enough. And there's a ton of companies that are saying, actually, this is one of the reasons now why the just churn in businesses is so large. Organizations flit into and out of existence because the rate of technological change and the societal change and the market change that it drives is just faster than ever before. I saw a great graph in the New York Times a few years ago about the penetrance of certain technologies in American households. And if you look at, for example, the washing machine, how fast did the washing machine get into households? It took years and years and years. And then over time now, when an innovation comes out, it's rapidly diffused around the world. And this means that the businesses and the customers that you have today are not promised to you. They could be totally gone tomorrow by someone else, taken by someone else. I went a little bit far afield from your question there, Laurel.
No, that's okay. Thank you for that. I guess not surprisingly, we have a number of questions around securing funding, obviously on the mind of potential entrepreneurs. So we'll take this one, I think, which is probably especially relevant given the mission of our school and the focus on business and society. So with entrepreneurs with business models related to the public interest, how can one successfully find funding for such a venture?
Yeah, that's tough. It is tough. But it's something that is a common tough question here. As you know, Laurel, the kind of student that Yale SOM attracts really gives a damn about the world. I think if I was to say that there's one thing that distinguishes the school from other schools, it's that people who come here just, obviously they're talented people, and there's talented people at all top business schools, but uniquely among business schools, I think, or schools of management, the students who come to Yale really care about making the earth a better place. And so we end up with a lot of entrepreneurs who are working on things that are for public benefit. What does that mean? Oftentimes that means that they're producing positive externalities. So they are working on businesses that make lives better, but they're not able to capture that benefit necessarily. So you can imagine, for example, I'm combating climate change. Well, who are you going to charge for that exactly? who's the payer, right? So these are really challenging. So returning now to your question of how do you craft a business model around that is sustainable? There's no one answer. Some common answers are that you're designing products and services for consumers who are willing to pay a premium to have positive externalities, right? So that would be like free range eggs, that would be organic cotton clothing, things of that nature. Others are that you rely upon donations. That would be a very typical nonprofit route. But the truth is but the particulars vary from venture to venture. For all ventures of that nature, it is a very difficult thing to do. And I think part of the reason you might go to a business school is to understand business models, understand economics, understand strategy, such that you can design a business model that renders business that is in the public interest a profitable and sustainable organization.
I realize a tough question to answer succinctly in this format, but thank you for that. Another funding related question, I'll try to read this one mostly verbatim. So in your experience, is it preferable for founders to be uniformly optimistic in their projections with the understanding that investors will discount from that projection?
Yeah.
Or should they build credibility by additionally providing some downside analysis at the risk of scaring off an investor?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that question. I've recently been working on a paper about this and about bullshitting more generally. Optimism and bullshitting, which are almost necessary components of entrepreneurship. Okay, so why is this? Well, you're asking people to join you in some crazy endeavor. Employees, customers, venture capitalists, early investors, to believe in a future that you see, that other people don't see, that could be, but is not now. And so one of the duties that you have is to paint for them that future, to show them what it is. And one major component of that is your projections, financial projections, right? We're going to make money. We're going to go out and we're going to change the world. And when we do that, it's going to rack up profits and so on and so forth. So you need to paint a positive picture. In the absence of a positive picture, if you're not positive about it, if you're not excited, who's gonna join you? Okay, well, where does that line end, though? Do we run afoul of being overly optimistic? And the answer is yeah. I think pretty quickly you do. And so, in my coming full circle back to the question, should you provide downside analysis and caveats? The answer is yes. That you should. You should say. And how do entrepreneurs typically articulate such things? You can think of it, a very popular framework is just to put it in a sandwich to say, look, this is going to be a huge market. We're going to go out and change the world. People are going to be happy with this. This is what we're projecting. We have a number of downside analyses. There's things that we don't know, and things that we believe to be true, but might not be true. And I'm happy to talk to you about those things, about the caveats, about the downside analyses. But I want to tell you that we're very confident, we're very optimistic, and here's our best model of a positive world is as follows, right? So I just kind of stuck that in a sandwich there. I do think speaking about downsides, speaking about the warts, not hiding things, lends credibility, establishes trust, makes you the kind of leader that other people want to get behind.
I have a few questions around kind of what we started our conversation with, talking about early experimentation kind of within this process. So can you share a real life example of early experimentation in either a venture that you were a part of, or perhaps something that you worked on with a current or former SOM student?
Oh yeah, sure. So I mean, now I'm working with students all the time who are doing experiments. Mostly, oftentimes they don't want to. They're very convinced. My usual interaction with a student is that they have some industry experience and they come in with an idea and they say, oh, I'm going to sell I'm going to sell, XYZ to person ABC who has this need. And my response is BS. I don't believe that those people exist, and I don't believe that they need the thing that you think they need. So how do we usually answer that? Oftentimes, it's as simple as building. A very common. Let's say, for example, you have some consumer-facing product. A new mask, a new kind of whatever design for COVID masks, athletic COVID masks. Okay, something like that. Just to anonymize a little bit, but this kinds of experiments are very common. We would then be creating landing pages that describe the product. We would be creating different variants of those landing pages. We would be taking out ads on Google, on Facebook, on other social media that drive people to those landing pages and test different messages. So you might believe that middle-aged people playing intramural sports are the right market, but it turns out that runners are, or that youth sports is the real market. And so we're taking out ads that test the reception of the product across those different demographics. That's a super important thing. We're testing different marketing messages. What is the value proposition that people that inclines people to purchase the product or to click on a button through which they can learn more about a product? Oftentimes, students are building pre-launch email lists and things like that. So engage stakeholders who want to know when the product launches. This is a great example. I mean, if you can't get people to sign up for an email list to know about the product, they clearly don't have the need for the product as much as you think they do, right? So these are the kinds of experiments that people are doing. There's other kinds of things too. So in product design, we might be building prototypes and testing those prototypes. Students who have food ventures are oftentimes pivoting and developing numerous kinds of recipes, sending out those samples to people. I just received a sample from a venture this week of different kinds of flavors, and I'm filling out surveys and things like that. So these are the kinds of experiments that one often sees. It's more difficult in B2B businesses, but not impossible.
Mm-hmm. I think there's definitely some interest from the audience in hearing some specific SOM examples. So I won't be overly prescriptive about what the lesson learned needs to be, but an example of an SOM venture that you've worked with and kind of gotten through this early stage experimentation and had the opportunity to either confirm that something was on the right track or make a significant pivot, or just flat out learn that an idea was not a good one and to move on.
Yeah, the latter thing happens all the time, which is a good thing, right? You don't want to devote your efforts to something that isn't working out. So specifics. Usually, I'm not super jazzed to talk about people's companies specifically, only because my interaction with students is always private, right? And I don't. But I like the information I have about student ventures. I don't share with other people usually. I don't want people to. I want students to feel like I'm not sharing intimate details. But just a randomly selected example, not the best example at all. There's a student last year who working on an ed tech startup, and we had this question about who within organizations was the person who could make purchasing decisions for this ed tech product, which is software as a service. And so we designed an experiment to figure out within different organizations, what are the kinds of titles that would indicate to him, this entrepreneur who was able to make a purchasing decision. And it wasn't people he thought it was. First, we started thinking it was teachers, and it wasn't teachers. And very few institutions were teachers able to make purchasing decisions for this SaaS. That's been a hot space, obviously, ed tech, now that everyone's at home. All the kids are at home. My kids are at home.
How have data mining and social media analytics changed the way that you collect evidence?
Not much, not much at the early stage, and just because people's experiments are so small that they're not having cool big data problems. Now we teach that stuff here. There's actually a class in social media analytics. There's a class in big data. We have a core class in modeling managerial decisions. a couple different classes in probability and statistics. But for entrepreneurs, actually, most of the experiments are simple. They're surveys, they're prototypes, they're small, click-through kinds of experiments. It's really simple stuff. So I would say the revolution in analytics hasn't much affected small entrepreneurs. Now, once you get larger and you're asking questions of larger audiences, that's a different thing. So, yeah.
This is a little bit of a pivot from what we've been talking about, but I like this question. What do you look for in hires number 5 through number 20? So not your C-suite or your co-founder, but the hires that will define your culture.
Oh, geez, Pisa. Yeah, that's an advanced question. I don't think I have a simple answer there. I think there's some things that are special about those people that you need to think about. One is that these are typically people who are taking a big risk and not being compensated for it. So the empirical data that we have around early stage employees who are not in the founder class is that they have less than desirable outcomes. So if when startups go under, those people have permanently decreased on average earnings for the rest of their life. So they don't recover, right? So if you join a startup and you're 5 through 20, the average, on average, it's difficult to recover if the startup goes under. Okay, so what does that mean for you as the founder? One, it's important to be super forthright with those people about the risk they're taking and to design opportunities for those people to grow in the ways they wish to grow, to be compensated fairly, and so on and so forth. I think that the person who posed this question embedded probably the best answer into the question, and that is culture and fit. Those are certainly all your early hires as an entrepreneur are opportunities for you to define what the organization is going to be. If you are lucky, your organization will be growing really quick, and you have to think, look, if I hire this person, they're going to hire 10 people that are like them, right? They're going to have a massive influence on the hierarchy as it grows. And do I want an organization that is like this person? Or the question you might ask yourself even better is this person reflective of the kind of organization that I wish to have? And I think those are very difficult things to answer, especially in one's typical interviewing structure. So oftentimes in my startups and in the startups that I advise on campus, we'll see a lot of people doing, I guess, for what you might call internships. So in my startups, for example, I would often have people join the company in a part-time capacity and work with us on particular projects, usually things that are not critical path, usually things that are beneficial to them and to us, things that are not confidential as much maybe. And we see, does this relationship work out? Are we a good fit for this person? Are they a good fit for us? And we articulate that this is upfront going to be a temporary thing without presumption. And that's been, I've found that to be a very successful model for me.
I think maybe we'll end on a little bit more of a philosophical note. I'm going to kind of make an amalgam of a few questions that have come through.
Sure.
But I think it sort of builds up to what's been the greatest lesson you've learned through your own entrepreneurial journey, and kind of tacked on to that any advice on how budding entrepreneurs can deal with, this is pulling from a few areas: failure, adversity, doubt, all of the nastier things that come along with being an entrepreneur.
Yeah. The greatest thing I've learned that is tough to answer. I think the answer that most readily comes to mind is that I have become very modest about my ability to predict the future. I see so many ventures at Yale, talented people, and of course my reaction to them is heterogeneous. I mean, some I look at them and I think that's never going to work, and others I think, wow, this is for sure going to work. And I've just been struck at how bad I am at how inaccurate those decisions are, that there have been, I cannot predict who is going to be successful. I mean, some are just, maybe that's not entirely fair to myself. But what I've realized is that I feel like I am not great at predicting who's going to be successful. And oftentimes I attribute it to students living in a future that I can't see sometimes, that they're younger, that they have particular backgrounds, and there's some aspect of human existence that they have an insight into, and I just don't see it. And so it's been interesting to watch those counterintuitive ventures, those ones I didn't think succeed. And even students who I didn't think would succeed, maybe because they didn't fit to my mold of what an entrepreneur should be or how an entrepreneur should behave, and then to see them prove me wrong. So I've become more humble, I guess, over the years about my own judgment. Maybe that just means I'm a bad entrepreneurship teacher. I don't know. And then how to deal with adversity and whatnot, and the crushing doubt and fear. Those are tough, and not just that's one side of the token. I think the other side of the token is that you'll be involved in a game that has, as I said earlier, skewed distributed returns. And so, for example, I've been embedded in communities of entrepreneurs for 15, 20 years. And my colleagues have all sorts of different outcomes, right? Some people have become filthy rich and super famous and made a great impact on the world, and many others have not done well. And I think so. Another aspect of, let's say, the disutility that one might find in entrepreneurship is just your ability to compare, or your tendency to compare what you've done and how successful you've been, I think is a little bit more painful than maybe in some other vocations, because you'll see some of your colleagues who are becoming entrepreneurs, they take their companies public and whatnot. So how does one deal with that? I think, and other kinds of units of disutility, like the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I think you have to think of it as an adventure. You have to embrace the adventure and understand that it's a great privilege to be able to do bold and brave things, to attempt great things, and to attempt to build new organizations. And would you choose the alternative, to do something boring that did not evoke fear and doubt? And I think the answer is usually no. There is, I think, for these people who choose to try to change the world, some special respect that ought to be given. There's a great quote from Theodore Roosevelt. It was which I'll butcher, but is roughly about this, that that some kind of honor or accolades are due to those people who fail again and again in striving to do something great. And their place ought not to be with those cold, timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. And so this is the person in the arena quote. What mattered to Theodore Roosevelt was being in the arena, doing the bold and brave things, risking defeat and risking failure. And so I think as an entrepreneur, you have to think of yourself as being in the arena, not like those other cold, timid souls.
I think that is an excellent place to end our conversation. Though, Kyle, I feel like we could easily go for another hour. This has been so fun and so informative. I'm sure everyone joining us today will not be surprised to hear Kyle Jensen is an absolute student favorite here, and many entrepreneurs and otherwise are clamoring to learn from him as part of their SOM experience. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, friends.
Very much appreciate it. Before we go, I will call everyone's attention to, we just have a few events coming up before the end of the year. We have a busy week next week, fireside chat with Professors Marina Neisner and Toby Moskowitz to discuss ESG investing. Should be very interesting. And that's on the 9th. Also on the 9th, a virtual Yale SOM campus tour. On the 10th, we have our online application tips panel, which I'll be joining for once again. And then on, I believe, Friday, we have an alumni conversation with Raul Martinez Ostos, class of 99, who's chairman of the board and country head for Mexico at Barclays. So busy week next week. We hope we'll see many of you again for some of those events. Thank you so much again, Kyle, and thank you so much to everyone for joining today. Take care.
Thank you.